This is a 1985 Honda CRX SI, except it's different from all the other CRXs because this one has no roof. Honda never made the CRX as a convertible, but this CRX is a convertible. And today I'm going to review it and explain what this is and why this is. And I'll also show you all of this car's quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this Honda CRX Straman convertible conversion is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This has a manual transmission, it's the high performance SI model, and it's a rare Straman convertible. Only a few hundred of these were made and surely far fewer survive. But this one survives on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this CRX convertible, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time for the quirks and features of this convertible Honda CRX. Starting with a little overview of the CRX, which Honda sold from 1984 to 1991. It was based on the Honda Civic at the time, but it was supposed to be kind of a sportier alternative to the more practical Civic. Now, in '85, this car's year, there were two versions of the CRX. They both used a 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine. There was the HF, which stood for high fuel efficiency, and it had 77 horsepower. And then there was the SI. That's this version, the performance model, with 91 horsepower. Now, SI stood for sport injection, and of course, that's a performance trim level that Honda still uses to this day. It started in this era, the original SI. Now, this car got its extra power with a few tweaks over the HF's four-cylinder. There were different intake valves, a revised intake, there was shorter gearing for better acceleration, and some other tweaks to go from 77 to 91 horsepower. Doesn't sound like a lot, and it isn't, but this car weighed less than 2,000 pounds, and that was with a roof. So it was not a lot of horsepower, but not a lot of car to move. But while the CRX is certainly interesting, it's the convertible component of this car that makes it especially unusual. Honda never made a convertible CRX, and that was pretty common even among sporty cars in the late 70s and 80s, mainly because there were a lot of rumors at the time that the US federal government was going to restrict convertible sales and make automakers stop selling them. There were fears that a rollover in a convertible was unsafe, and so there was a thought the convertible might go away. As a result, a lot of automakers stopped doing convertibles. They didn't want to put a lot of development money into something that would soon be banned by regulation. And that's how you got cars like the Porsche 911 Targa, which had a removable roof, but still a roof structure for rollover protection. Same deal with the Jaguar XJ-SC and various other cars that use T-tops. That idea was born in the mid to late 70s because there was this fear that the government was going to kill off convertibles entirely, and so T-tops were thought to be the solution. A removable top but not a full convertible would still comply with potentially upcoming regulations. However, there was one guy here in Southern California who thought convertibles still had a future. It was a guy named Richard Straman, and he converted an enormous amount of cars from coupe to convertible throughout this era. He was especially known for Ferrari conversions. He did a lot of 400 and 412 models, the front engine V12. He also did Ferrari 456 convertible conversions in the 90s, but maybe he's best known for converting Testarossas into convertibles, which Ferrari never did. In part, I assume, for the same reason that other automakers didn't do convertibles at that time either, this potential change in regulations. But Straman was converting. And it wasn't just Ferraris. Straman also converted Mercedes S-Class coupe models of the day. Mercedes only made a coupe. Straman made a convertible. The Z31 Nissan 300ZX was only offered with T-tops, but Straman made a convertible, and the Honda CRX was only a hatchback, a fixed roof hatchback or coupe, but Straman made a convertible. Reportedly, around 300 of these Straman converted from coupe to convertible in order to satisfy buyers, presumably largely in Southern California, but also elsewhere. They wanted a fun little convertible, and this was that. Now, despite what you may think, it's probably not all that easy to convert a coupe to a convertible and actually make it good. You don't just saw off the roof and call it a day. There is more to it than that. We'll start with the windshield. Now, where you do saw off the roof, you have exposed jagged metal pieces. And so Straman had to create some sort of roof cap that actually looks pretty factory and would keep you from cutting yourself on the exposed part of the roof that had been cut off. Next, there's the task of creating a top. This isn't just an open car, it has a roof that goes up and down, and so you have to measure and perfectly size and shape and fit the top to this exact car, which obviously isn't going to be particularly easy, and you have to have a structure in that top that lets it go up and down, back and forth, and can withstand a lot of use, people putting it up and down and back and forth all the time. And that top also has to have a window in it, of course in this case a plastic window for the back, so you can see out the rear. That's where the real Straman expertise came in, creating a perfectly fitted top that actually works for this car. And then they added a roll bar, because pulling the roof off this car did mean that you were exposing the occupants to a little bit of danger, since that was a lot of the structural rigidity if the car rolled over. So a roll bar is added behind the seats, as you can see, and I suspect that probably added some rigidity back in as well. This is a very strong, very sturdy roll bar. I think the theory is that it supports the entire weight of the car in a rollover. I'm not sure if it would actually work, but that's the thinking. And it's really bolted down here, and maybe it does some of the work of getting back some of the rigidity that's removed when you take off the roof. But regardless, Straman added in a roll bar as well as part of this conversion. But possibly the hardest part of converting the CRX into a convertible was the trunk, because all CRX models were hatchbacks. They had a glass hatch that opened up in back, whereas the convertible, well, it loses that obviously, and so they had to fit a trunk. I'm not sure how they went about doing it. All this stuff was 40 years ago. There's not a lot of info out there, but I have a suspicion that this trunk came from the Honda Prelude, which was about the same size as the Civic and the CRX in its day. Of course, it could have also come from a Civic, maybe, but they added a trunk and a structure around this car to support the trunk, including different fenders and a different panel in front of the trunk where the hinges are mounted. Everything had to be changed in back, the whole structure of the car, when it went from a hatchback to a convertible with a trunk. Like I said, harder than you think to just take off the roof of a car. Now, the convertible top in this car goes up easily. It's easy to just reach back there, lift up the convertible top, and stick it into place. This is a testament to Straman's capability as an aftermarket top manufacturer. They didn't just throw some canvas on there and call it a day. They gave you an actual working, workable, usable top, and it's the same deal when the top goes down. Very easy to just pull it back and put it down. Manually operated, as you can see, but it's so small that you can actually manually operate it from the seats in the car. You can just reach back and pull it up if you want to, and if you're sitting at a stoplight and suddenly it becomes sunny, you can just reach up and put it back down. It was that easy. As for latching the top, it was also pretty simple. You get two latches. There's one on the driver's side, as you can see, and one on the passenger side, and there's handles that just clip the latches into place, and then the top is securely fastened to the windshield frame, and you can drive around with the roof up in case you still want to drive this car on a rainy or snowy day. Now, here's one interesting little hidden Straman Easter egg. On the driver's side metal top rail, you can see a little serial number printed here, ST followed by some numbers. Each Straman CRX was individually numbered. This one is numbered ST1058, which means it was the 58th car. I think they started at ST1001, or maybe 59 if they start at 1000, but you get the idea. Each car had a little number right here to signify a Straman conversion, which is actually somewhat important because there were other people chopping CRXs into convertibles at the time. Straman was the best known and surely the highest quality, and so that little serial number lets you know it is a genuine Straman conversion. Now, what ended up happening with convertibles, of course, is that they didn't die out, and government regulations didn't kill them off. In fact, they experienced a massive resurgence in popularity in the 1990s. All sorts of convertibles came out, and they were really hot again. In fact, the CRX's replacement was called the Honda Del Sol, and it was only offered with an open roof after the CRX had only been offered with a hardtop. As for Straman, he kept making convertible conversions throughout the 1990s, but in 2000 he retired. He gave up his business and he moved on to a vintage sailboat, which he sailed around the world for the next decade. It must have been nice to be in the convertible conversion business in the 80s and 90s. So that's the overview and the convertible top situation. Let's talk through the rest of the quirks and features of this car. For one thing, it has a fairly small trunk. Obviously, the practicality, the hatchback component has been removed. You do have storage back there, but it's relatively limited, although there's a surprising number of other storage compartments throughout this small car. One is directly behind the seats. You can see it here. It locks with a key. This compartment was on all the regular CRXs as well, and they kept it in place for the convertible, which is kind of cool. You also have a glove box, of course, nice storage spot on the dashboard, but in addition, there's a storage compartment on the upper dashboard as well. You flip up this lid, and there's even more storage there. Not something you expect to see, but there it is. As for other interesting interior items, one is that it's actually surprisingly roomy in here. There's not all that much like stuff to steal your space, and so even sitting in here as a relatively tall adult, I got decent space in this car, although I wonder if it had a roof, would I still be saying that? If I sit straight up, I can see my head is looking at the top of the windshield, so it probably would be a little bit more claustrophobic. But as it sits, fairly decent sized in here. One interesting quirk, to the left of the steering wheel, you can see this button, which opened up the sunroof in this car. Obviously, that button no longer has any value, but it's still there. Another interesting item changed with the whole roof situation is the dome light, which I presume was located somewhere on the roof in the original CRX. Well, now it's been moved down here to below the dashboard on the driver's side. You have a door open, and that's the light that turns on. The dome light, which is usually overhead. There's no overhead to have it in this car. Now, right above that dome light, you have your climate controls, which oddly are mounted sort of in the driver's instrument panel area. Climate controls are more for the driver, although easily accessible by the passenger too. Interestingly, this car does have air conditioning, and when you put it on, the button reminds you that it's a Honda, because for some reason it has the Honda logo right next to it. I don't know why they needed to put that there, but it is. Other than the nice add-on of air conditioning, this car is very basic. This interior is very basic 1980s Japanese economy car, which means simple, functional, not a lot of extras, not a lot of stuff you don't really need. For example, you got manual crank windows in here. You roll up the window and roll it down in the literal sense. You have manual locks in this car. You push the lock button and then it's locked. No power button. You got manual mirrors in this car. You adjust it with this little stick coming off the mirror, driver and passenger side. Thankfully, this car is so small, the driver could easily reach over to the passenger side to adjust it, but it's all pretty basic in this interior, like a lot of Japanese cars from this era. In fact, it is so basic that the driver's side has a floor mat, but it only has one single stripe. That's all you got. Just one one stripe floor mat. They couldn't even give you two. Now, the seats in this particular CRX are not original to this car. I discovered that. You look at the pattern, they look like 90s, 2000 seats, but also it says SRS airbag. The CRX did not have side airbags, I can promise you that. These seats surely add some extra padding and comfort that 1985 seats did not, and they have nice little touches. The driver's side has an armrest that you can fold down. The passenger side has a little storage cubby. No armrest for the passenger, but storage. No storage for the driver, but armrest. Also, about to climb out, one other item worth pointing out. On the passenger side windshield A-pillar, you have a grab handle that you can use to grab to get out of the car, although I wouldn't. Because the windshield is now kind of floating here by itself with no extra strength or support from the roof. And so I'm not sure how much weight I would really want to put on that grab handle, but it is there in case of emergencies. You just might, if you use it, you might have a different emergency. The windshield might bend. And next up, moving outside, the CRX convertible. Kind of the same deal as inside. It was pretty no frills, pretty basic out here. There wasn't a lot of crazy risks with the design or, frankly, interesting quirks and features. One item worth pointing out, the door handles in this car are vertical, which is something I always thought was cool about the CRX. A nice little design detail, although somewhat more common back in the 1980s. You also have around back the little Honda logo with OK. That was a sticker that Honda used to put on almost all of their cars. It came from the factory and it let you know that it was checked out for quality and you were assured you were getting a good, well looked at Honda before it left the factory and shipped to you. Also in back, one other item worth mentioning, the trunk pops open with the trunk popper in the interior. Even though that was designed to open up the hatchback, it still works for the trunk in this car, which is a nice little touch that again makes it feel pretty factory, pretty high quality convertible conversion. All right, driving the CRX SI Straman convertible conversion. The first question that I think a lot of people will have, is about cowl shake. And the answer to the question is yes. Yes, there is a lot of cowl shake. So if you don't know, that's like basically the windshield frame. So like how really tight, how really rigid is this car? And the answer is you can tell almost immediately. You go over any bump, you do get a considerable amount of shaking from that windshield frame. This car is not, I mean, it was designed to be a coupe, and so there were structural members that were removed in the conversion to a convertible. But such is life. And I gotta tell you, indeed, such is life. It's maybe worth it. And I say that because this is so cool. You know, the neat thing about the CRX is that it was fun. It doesn't have a lot of power. In fact, it doesn't have basically any power. 90 horsepower is just laughable. But the car was so small that it was just a tossable little thing. And that's why it had a cult following throughout the late 80s and into the 90s, and even kind of still today. People still love the CRX, talk about the CRX, bemoan the fact that Honda never really replaced the CRX. It is still a beloved car, and that was because of its like tossable nature. And this is tossable. It's just like what everybody loved about the CRX. It's fun, you can throw it around, you can enjoy it, it's great. The steering is quick and commutative. There's not much to it. I mean, it's just a fun car that you can kind of point and shoot without much worry or fear of it doing something silly or stupid. It's just like a cool little throw it around, eager to please car. But the really cool thing is the convertible top adds this whole new dimension that the regular CRX doesn't have. Now I can sit here and not only have this kind of fun tossable car, but enjoy the open world. And here in Southern California, you know, it's no coincidence that Straman's shop was up in Costa Mesa in Orange County, where everybody all the time is around sunshine. Like, yeah, we want to have our convertibles here, and this is one of the ones we want to have. And so you get this amazing combination of like the fun of a CRX plus the enjoyment of a convertible. I think this would actually be like one of the coolest like 80s convertibles if it wasn't for the fact that then the Miata comes out a couple years after this car, and suddenly the Miata's rear-wheel drive and a purpose-built convertible instead of front-wheel drive and a sort of squiggly one. And so that's where you lose it. But, you know, look, everybody's got a Miata. This is cool. Like, this is definitely going to turn more heads at Cars and Coffee. The Miata drives better. There's no question. It feels like more of a sports car. It's more fun. It's more exciting. But there's sort of a peppy eagerness that the CRX has that it's just hard to, it's fun. It was a cool little car. It feels almost even more tossable and even more like little and dinky controllable than a Miata does, even if it's not necessarily better to drive or more fun. Flooring the throttle, man, it is not, fast is not a term that you would use to describe this car. It's fun around tight corners. Honestly, what it's fun for is city driving, like in a city, because you don't really have a lot of speed that you're trying to get up, and you can take some 90-degree turns pretty quick, and you can really turn a normal like city ride into kind of a thrill in this stupid little car. Anybody who's ever liked the CRX but you live in Southern California or, you know, Texas or Florida, somewhere where it's just nice a lot of the time, this thing is cool. It's a neat car. I'm into it. It's kind of a funny, stupid little thing, but I like the quirky stuff, and you can't say that this isn't quirky. And so that's the Straman CRX. Tremendously interesting, weird, quirky little car. It's not fast by modern standards. It's gonna have a lot of chassis flex, but it's cool and it's unusual and it's perfect for Southern California, and it could be yours on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the Straman CRX a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 42 out of 100, which places the CRX Straman here against some other similar cars. The CRX Straman is cool. It's decently attractive, interesting, quirky, head-turning, but once the Mazda Miata arrived, it was a bit redundant, since the Miata drives better and was surely cheaper since it didn't require an aftermarket convertible conversion. The CRX is now more appealing solely as a quirky showpiece, but it certainly is that, a lot more unusual and distinctive than a Miata.